Does Israel matter today in God's plan? Are there any prophecies about Israel that must be fulfilled before Jesus comes back? Is the rebirth of the modern nation of Israel a construct of God, or is it a sinister deception of the devil? And do our theological beliefs about these things necessarily need to affect our opinions on foreign policy? We're going to talk about all these things today, not because Tucker Carlson is talking about them, not because Candace Owens is talking about them, but because the book of Zechariah asks these questions and, I believe, gives us the answers, including one more that we're going to look at today. Does God have a weakness? You will find out today on the God and His Prophets podcast. Welcome to God and His Prophets. This is a verse-by-verse study through the Bible's major and minor prophets. My name is Luke Taylor. Today we're going to be looking at Zechariah's third night vision. This is often known as the man with the measuring line. It's going to start off with this dude who shows up in lots of different visions of the Bible. This is an angel who measures things. Like that's just his whole job. He just goes around measuring things. You actually saw him already on this podcast if you followed my Ezekiel study. He shows up toward the end of Ezekiel's book in one of the visions, and he takes Ezekiel on a journey through the millennial temple of the future, and he'll say, this is this distance, and this is this many cubits, and goes through very detail. He's a very detail-oriented angel. We also see him in the book of Revelation, and he's showing up to measure, again, stuff in Jerusalem, like the temple in Revelation 11. This dude, I'm thinking he's like the angel who's got the Guinness Book of World Records up in heaven. He's just like, he keeps track of all this data, okay? He's probably up there with like a timer, and he's like, this is the longest sermon that's ever been preached in the history of mankind, okay? It was probably going on at your church last week, right? He's up there with the clicker. That's the most times I've heard someone say, Daddy God in a prayer before. And so, he's up there just keeping track of all this stuff. That's his job. His job is to keep track of things. And we see this dude as we get into the book of Zechariah chapter 2. And so let's take a look at that. And by the way, if you're new here today, if you're like, what are you talking about, these night visions and all this stuff? Like, I thought we were going to talk about Jerusalem and is it part of God's plan for the future and the apple of God's eye. We're going to get into all that. I will even catch you up in just a few minutes. But hey, if you're new here today, welcome. We're working our way through the book of Zechariah. And so here is how chapter 2 begins. And I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then I said, Where are you going? And he said to me, To measure Jerusalem, to see what is its width and what is its length. And so, sorry, I didn't have all the verses up there. I'm trying to get the verses on the screen as I say this stuff, but I'm off a little bit sometimes. And so anyway, if you're watching, sorry, I had those verses a little sluggish there. My son got a tool belt like as a toy just a day or two ago, actually. It came in the mail, and he got this little tape measure. This is mine, but he got this little tape measure, and he's going around measuring things, and loves just walking around. I guess all guys like to do this. They hold up the tape measure, and they're just like, they just love pulling it out and letting it go back in, and he's going around measuring things. And this angel, it just kind of reminds me of my son here lately. He's going around measuring things in Jerusalem. Now, what is the point of all this? Why is he doing this? God is showing us through this vision. He's trying to encourage the people. And he's trying to say, hey, I am keeping track, okay? I'm keeping measurement. I've got plans. I've got data. Nothing escapes my notice. There was this kind of interesting moment in a political speech this past week that Zoran Mamdani, he's like the Islamic communist guy who just got elected over there in New York. And he said in his victory speech, I'm not quoting it perfectly, but he basically said, there is no problem too big for government to solve and no problem too small that government can't care about it. And so basically the point of that is he's saying government's going to take care of you. Nothing too big, nothing too small. And again, this is the communist way of looking at government. That's not how I look at government. But it's interesting because it is how I look at God. Like, that's actually a pretty good mantra for God. There's no problem too big for God to handle. And there's no detail in your life that's too small that it escapes God's notice, that he doesn't think about it or care about it. And so God, we see this in the Bible, he sends his angels to keep track of everything. There's all these angels who are always watching over mankind, keeping lists and keeping data on what mankind is up to, and they report on this to God. There's a classification of spiritual beings, you could call them angels, who are called the watchers. What do you think their job is? Okay, so he's got these angels who literally their job is to watch mankind and keep track of things. And I don't know what kind of, what a measuring tape looks like up in heaven. I guess it measures in cubits, right? Here's one. I've got one in it. If you see here, it goes into millimeters. That's what a measuring line does here. And I'm sure that God's measuring line up in heaven tracks millimeters, and probably smaller than that, because there is nothing too small for God to care about. Now, God's trying to show this to his people here. Why does he care so much about Israel? Why is he keeping such a close eye on Israel? Let's keep working our way through the verses. So, verse 3. And behold, the angel who talked with me came forward, and another angel came forward to meet him, and said to him, Run, say to that young man, Jerusalem shall be inhabited as villages without walls, because of the multitude of people and livestock in it. And I will be to her a wall of fire all around, declares the Lord, and I will be the glory in her midst. All right, so God says basically here, the number of people who come back to Israel, they are going to be so numerous, such a multitude of people who will come back to Israel someday, that they can't even be contained in the city. Okay, it's like you can measure, here's the walls, basically the border of the city, and the people won't even be able to be contained in those walls anymore because they will be so numerous. And so God says, you won't even be relying on your walls in those days. You will be relying on me. God will protect them as a wall of fire, is what he says. So God's going to protect his people. This statement right here, this is amazing. This is true today. Okay, Jerusalem is talked about there in verse 4 as a city without walls. Okay, some will even point this out in the prophecy about Gog and Magog, where it says Jerusalem will be a city of unwalled villages. And so people will say, well, that can't be true today because Jerusalem has walls today. And so we're going to discuss that later on, but I want to show you something I learned this week, and this is really interesting. The walls in Jerusalem, I've never been there, so I did not know this, but the walls in Jerusalem, they are really more they're more like a historical monument or a relic of the past than they are an actual defensive structure today or a utilitarian structure today. They don't have utility or purpose really in the city anymore beyond just as kind of a cool archaeological thing, because the walls, and I'm going to put up a picture here for those of you watching online, the walls are just a small portion of the city of Jerusalem. And so if you look here on the image on the screen, if you're listening on the podcast later, then you can go back and watch the video, or you can just let me describe it to you here. But you can see this brown border right here in this picture of a top-down view of Israel today, and this is showing where the city has walls today. Okay, you see a section of the city of Jerusalem here. But obviously, there's a lot more to Jerusalem than just what is contained within those brown borders. Like there's streets and roads and houses and businesses and tons of people who live in this area all around outside of that brown border. So what this is showing us is like, okay, Jerusalem, it's got some walls there in the city, but they are not encompassing the whole city by any means. This is the old part of the city from like thousands of years ago. These are walls that still remain. But this is not something that's by any means shows the border of Jerusalem today. I got another picture here showing some of these ancient walls. Here's like a modern picture for those of you looking online. And we've seen pictures of the walls of Jerusalem before, but I never realized like these walls do not surround the city of Jerusalem in modern times. They surround a section of the old part of Jerusalem, what used to be Jerusalem. But today, the people and the businesses and the houses and the roads, it far exceeds the borders of the old walls. So what does that mean? This prophecy that we're reading in the book of Zechariah, it has literally come true today. There are so many people who have come back to Israel, and really a lot of this is just since 1948, less than 100 years ago. So many people have returned that this prophecy has shown forth as true today. The people far exceed the boundaries of the old city walls. And so what God says is, I will be their protector. They will not be relying on these walls anymore. The people will exceed the boundaries of the walls. And so I just think that's pretty cool. Let me go to verse 4 again, because that's what we were reading here. Let me bring that back up. Jerusalem shall be inhabited as villages without walls because of the multitude of people and livestock in it. It has walls, but they don't really matter. Again, they're like a historical monument today. The people who live there are not relying on those walls. They live outside the walls, and because of the multitude of people who are there in Jerusalem. So thank you to holylandsite.com. That's where I found some of these pictures I was sharing with you today. And so this prophecy has come true in modern times. That's pretty cool. So if you're new today, let me catch you up. Zechariah is in this part of the book, the first 6 chapters, Zechariah has a series of night visions. There's going to be 8 of them. We're on the 3rd one today. And each one of these night visions carries a specific meaning, a purpose to the vision, a very simple idea. It's usually not complicated to figure out. So dream number 1, it was the man with the measuring line. And the purpose of this vision was to tell the people, God has seen all of your suffering and he is going to answer it. Like the people who are causing you to suffer right now, they will pay a price for that. Vision number 2, or dream number 2, it was the 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen. God was saying in that vision, I am going to punish the nations that have afflicted Israel. And then we get to vision number 3 here. The message of this one is Jerusalem is going to be restored, and it's going to outgrow its old borders. Because the old walls, they represent the old border, but the new city is going to outgrow the old borders because it'll have so many people in it. All right? That is the purpose of this dream. That's the simple idea right there, that there's the purpose of chapter 2. The 3rd night vision is all of chapter 2. So we're actually covering the whole chapter today. And let's keep going. Let me go to verse 6. God says, up, up, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord. For I have spread you abroad as the 4 winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. Up, escape to Zion, you who dwell with the daughter of Babylon. So these are the exiles. They're returning home after having been in captivity in Babylon for many years. That is the land of the north. And God calls it here the daughter of Babylon. The mother of Babylon is Babel and the Tower of Babel and the incident that happened there. That was the origin of Babylon. And we're going to learn some more about Babylon as we get into chapter 5 later. But and I think we see the mother of Babylon in Revelation towards the end of that. It's like chapter 17 or 18. We see her there. So this nation who exists in Zechariah's day, it's called the daughter of Babylon because it's descended from this ancient city of Babel. That's why it says the daughter of Babylon here. And God's telling the Jewish people, don't be afraid to leave. Get out of there. Come on back home. It's safe. Now, this is something God is saying back then. It's something God is saying today. This is one of those panoramic, kind of like the 4 horns and craftsman vision. It's a panoramic prophecy that's just talking about stuff that's generally true for all time. So it's not about one specific event, I don't believe. There's hints here that it's talking about lots of different time frames. And again, we'll get into some more of that later. Verse 8, for thus says the Lord of hosts, after his glory sent me to the nations who plundered you, for he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. Now, what does it mean here that Jerusalem is the apple of God's eye? Well, the apple of your eye, we use that expression to say something is very tender to you or something very precious to you. The apple of your eye actually refers to your pupil, okay? The dot right in the middle of your eye. And this is a part of our body that we protect at all costs, if you think about it. Like, we protect our eyes. The most sensitive part of your eye, the part that you would least want to have damaged of any part of your eye, would be your pupil. Okay, you take the biggest, strongest, burliest man that you know, okay, someone who spends a lot of time in the gym. I don't care how tough he is. You poke him right in the pupil of his eye, you poke him right there, he is going down, okay? Because this is something that would make the strongest man in the world crumple to the ground if you jabbed him right in the pupil of his eye. I know that's something that we cringe to even think about that, but that is what God is saying right here about Jerusalem. He's saying, you are the pupil of my eye. You're special to me. You hold a tender place to me. But also, Jerusalem is God's greatest weakness. Now, that might sound kind of sketchy to say. What do you mean God has a weakness? Okay, God is all powerful. God doesn't have weaknesses. God is Superman without the kryptonite. Okay, there's nothing that could bring God down. Why would you say that Jerusalem is God's weakness? Well, nothing can stop God. He is all powerful. Nothing can stop God unless God gives a way to stop him. If God gives a possibility, a manner in which people could stop God's plans. And guess what? God has done exactly that. He's done that repeatedly throughout Scripture. God has given opportunities to stop him and stop his plans if anybody was powerful or smart enough to overcome God. No one's been able to yet. I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to. But let me give you an example here. God says in the Old Testament that the Messiah is going to come through one of the descendants of Abraham. And then later on, God says that the Messiah is going to come through one of the descendants of Jacob. Like God narrows down the scope of his promise, his plan for a future Messiah. And God would just narrow it down. Well, what does that mean? If you want to stop the Messiah, all you got to do is wipe out the children of Abraham. Or you know what? Now all you have to do is wipe out the children of Jacob, and you can stop the Messiah. And so God, I don't want to say he painted a target, but this did create a target for the devil, where the devil could say, hey, if I want to stop God, all I got to do is wipe out Israel. And that's why we see this all throughout the Old Testament. Again and again, Satan, plan after plan, attempt after attempt to wipe out Israel. Why were they such a target to the devil? Because I don't want to know if I want to say it this way. God made them a target because he gave them the promise. You know, there's a blessing associated with being the chosen people, the nation of promise, but it also brings, it makes you a target for the enemy, because if he wants to get at God, he can't defeat God, but he could try to attack Jerusalem. And if the devil could have wiped out all the Jews in the Old Testament, no Messiah would have come and the devil would have won. And that's why it says here, this is God's weakness. This is the pupil. This is the apple of his eye. This is the one thing that could bring God down if the devil could actually destroy it. Thank God, literally, he has not been able to do that. All right? Nothing is going to stop God. But God's not done with Jerusalem yet. And this is a key point today, and this is the controversial part. Because people would probably be with me so far. Like, yeah, I see in the Old Testament, the devil was always trying to wipe out the Israelites. Even if it doesn't say the devil did this, the devil did that, like we know he's the big bad. So we know this has been his plan, was to wipe out the Israelites. He never could, and Jesus came. But what about now? Well, there are numerous other prophecies, some from the Old Testament that have not been completed yet, some new ones that come up in the New Testament that speak of God's future plan for Israel. For example, Matthew 23:39. Jesus says this in his chapter after he excoriates and rails on the Pharisees for like the whole chapter. And then at the end, he's tearful. And he says, I wish I could have gathered you under my wings like a hen that gathers its chicks. And he says this, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So what is he saying right there? Jesus has said, I am not going to come again, my second coming. I am not going to return until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Until you turn to me, I am not coming again. So the second coming of Christ is predicated on the repentance of Israel. Isn't that wild? Now, there are other things that could happen in prophecy. I'm one of those crazy Christians who believes in a rapture, so I believe the rapture could happen at any time, and that would kick off the end times, and that would kick off a lot of this stuff that we'll read about in Zechariah. But at the end of the tribulation, Jesus comes back, but he said, I'm not coming back till Israel repents and acknowledges him as the Messiah and says, oh, he was the one who came in the name of the Lord. Here's another one. Romans 11, this is from Paul. He says, lest you be wise in your own conceits, I want you to understand this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. Let me say that again. All Israel will be saved. Now, has that happened yet? That all Israel has gotten saved? Okay, he said first we're waiting for the fullness of the Gentiles to come in. What does that mean? That is when all the Gentiles who are going to get saved, all right? And that has not happened yet. There's still people who are, we're waiting to see the Gentiles come in. And so, and Gentiles are non-Jewish people. We're still waiting on them to become Christians and get saved. So in my opinion, once the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, that's probably what's going to kick off the rapture. But after that, it's Israel's turn, okay? And the book of, or several books in the Bible make it clear that during this tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, the 7-year tribulation, this is when the Israelites, the Israelis, we might say today, the Jewish people all over the world, when they will realize Jesus was the Messiah, and collectively they will turn to him. And that's what verse 26 there from Romans 11 is talking about, that they will all be saved. And the book of Zechariah is going to go into some great detail on that, especially as we get to the end, chapters 11, 12, 13, 14. So we're going to get into some more of that. Like this is a theme that's going to come up a lot here in this book. But for today, we're going to go ahead and finish up chapter 2. All right. So some pleasant verses here, starting at verse 9. I'm not being sarcastic, like just some pleasant verses here as we wrap up, talking about the blessings for future Israel. Behold, I will shake my hand over them, and they shall become plunder for those who serve them. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me. So we're going to talk about this some more next week. But he's saying right here, like the nations that you have been serving, you Israelites who've been away from home, they will become plunder for you. And he says, sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I come and I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord. And many nations shall join themselves to the Lord in that day, and shall be my people, and I will dwell in your midst, and you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. So when Jesus finally does come back someday, he says many nations are going to join themselves to the Lord. What is that talking about? This is a panoramic prophecy, a panoramic vision. It's not talking just about the second coming of Christ. At the time that Jesus comes back, there's going to be many Gentiles, non-Jewish nations, many Gentiles who have pledged themselves to the Lord. It's talking about the church. It's talking about the Old Testament saints who were not part of Israel. The tribulation saints, those who get saved in the end times. Those nations that stay loyal to Israel and don't submit to the Antichrist, okay? These are going to be joined to Jesus. They have bet on the winner, and they're going to be joined to Jesus at the second coming. Those nations that wanted loyalty to the Antichrist, they will be destroyed, utterly wiped out. And so that's what he's talking about there. Verse 12, and the Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he has roused himself from his holy dwelling. And so we'll end it right there. Well, and that's the end of the chapter, so we kind of have to end it right there. Now, there's going to be some who say, hey, all this was fulfilled in the past, okay? Like, this is all talking about stuff that has already taken place, and, you know, these visions were for thousands of years ago. I would disagree. I say that this is being fulfilled today, and that God still has a plan for Israel in the future. And why do I say this? Well, not all the prophecies have been fulfilled. The prophecies about Jesus and his first coming were literally fulfilled. And so I believe there's prophecies about the second coming and God's plan for Israel that are going to be literally fulfilled. This idea of that Paul brought up in Romans 11:26 of all Israel being saved, that has not happened yet. If you look today, like 1% of Israel has been saved. Now, I don't know what the demographics were back in Bible times, New Testament times, how many Israelite people, how many of them committed themselves to Jesus. I don't think it was most, okay? But I don't know. I don't know the demographics of that time when the church was growing. I don't know. But I don't think it was most. It's certainly not most today. So when has all Israel been saved? Has it happened yet? Okay. Again, it's like 1% today. Maybe all doesn't mean all. Maybe it doesn't mean 100%. Maybe it means the vast majority, 90%, 80%. Okay. I don't know. It hasn't been most in all of Israel's history. We're like at 1% today. So this prophecy has not come true. God still has a plan for Israel. God still has a plan for the Jewish people, wherever they are in the world. Someday, collectively, they are going to turn back to the Messiah, Jesus, and recognize that he was the Messiah, and that's whenever he can come back. And I believe that's whenever he will come back. So Zechariah 2, there's a lot of stuff going on it's not all necessarily about just when Jesus comes back. I think there's stuff being fulfilled today. Some of it may have been fulfilled in the past. This is just looking panoramically at world history and talking about he has a general plan. He will be that wall of fire, and he will preserve Israel. Now, it does have a number of connections, some vague allusions, I would say, to another particular event that we talked about previously in our Ezekiel study, the Battle of Gog and Magog. I saw a lot of connections here in this chapter to stuff in Gog and Magog, and so much stuff, I don't think we got time to talk about it today. So next time, guys, that will be the point of discussion. I know I'm getting this episode out a little bit late. I really wanted to get it in Sunday night, and things just didn't come together for that. So I've had a lot of busy weekends the past month. I haven't been able to keep up with the podcast like I would have liked to. So I'm sorry about that. I wish, and then I thought, well, I'll just wait till next Sunday. And I thought, well, I can put it out a day early. So you can look at this as a day late or 6 days early from next Sunday, but you'll get the podcast Tuesday morning for those of you who listen on the podcast platforms. So, and if you stumbled across this video today and you're like, I want to keep up with the podcast, you can do it on YouTube, or you can go to God and His Prophets wherever you get your podcasts, listen to it in audio form. And next time, guys, we're going to be looking once again at Gog and Magog. I want to just talk about it from a perspective of Zechariah chapter 2. We have went through Gog and Magog in great detail because we did, like I said, the whole Ezekiel study. And I kind of felt by the time I got to chapters 38 and 39, I had felt I had earned the right to really slow down and pick that apart. So we spent 6 episodes, 6 weeks, going through that piece by piece by piece. So if that's all fresh on your mind, you might not need next week. Next week is just going to be kind of a recap, a refresher. If you want a refresher on Gog and Magog, it's a summary. It's not going to go into great detail about all the elements, but it's just kind of a recap and connecting it to Zechariah 2. And then next time after that, we'll probably get into Zechariah 3. And that's one of my favorite chapters of this book. So I'm looking forward to that. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already so you can get that. And you can reach out to me. Nothing with anti-Semitism. I know I'm not interested, okay? But you can reach out to me at GodAndHisProphetsPodcast @gmail.com. Every time I do one of these episodes about Israel, the Jewish people, all this kind of stuff, a lot of angry people come out of the woodwork, and that's what I want to talk about here as we wrap up. Because Tucker Carlson, he made some waves here a few weeks ago at this point, talking about how Zionist Christians, that they have wrecked America's foreign policy for decades by idolizing Israel, okay? And he called Zionist Christians, he called them heretics. Now, he did walk that back a few days later. He apologized. It was a good apology. I accept his apology. But he's like, I got a little carried away in the heat of the moment. But I accept his apology. Why is this such a controversial issue? Like, why is this such a big deal to so many people? Well, let's talk about these terms. A Zionist Christian is someone who believes that God still has a plan for Israel. Now, some, I guess, would call me a Zionist Christian. And then they don't like that how Zionist Christians vote, and that they say it has too much control over America's foreign policy. Let me just tell you, you can be a Zionist Christian and not believe that it has to affect anything about our foreign policy. Other than, I would say we should believe Israel has a right to exist. Okay? I do think that. I think we should believe that as Christians. Other than that, we should treat Israel the same as we treat any other country. All right? Now, Israel is kind of a westernized country. It's an ally of the United States. It's a fellow democratic state. And they have a lot of strategic importance in the Middle East and technologically advanced, and we can benefit from friendship with them. So, I mean, I think we should take all that into consideration, not because of the Bible, but because that's just smart politics. So I think we should be smart, but our belief on what the Bible says doesn't have to dictate every interaction we have with the nation of Israel. So we see this question, should Christians support, like 21st century Christians, should we support Israel here in these modern times as it's been reborn? Is this something with the Bible, or is this something is this a deception of the devil that he brought this nation back? Well, I don't think the devil's powerful enough to do that. I think this is God's land. God is the one who has promised to take care of Israel. So if it's back, God's the one who says, I scatter the people and I regather the people. And right now, they are being regathered. That ever since 2006, the majority of the world's Jewish people live in Israel. And so, should modern Christians support Israel? Well, we should support Israel's existence, okay? And the Bible says we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So I think we should do that. Beyond that, I wouldn't necessarily say that we are obligated to support anything that they do. It doesn't have to affect or control your opinion on foreign policy. Okay, take this. Tel Aviv is known as the homosexuality capital of the Middle East. All right, that's not a great thing to be known for. The COVID response in Israel, I thought it was way over the top. It was not good. All right, there's allegations out there that Israel like bombed an American battleship in the Mediterranean Sea back in like the 70s. Okay, I've heard allegations that we've caught them spying on us before. I don't know how much of all that's true. It could be conspiracy theories. It could be true. I don't have to like any of it. All right, and I would say we're not obligated to join them in a war. Now, they just recently had a battle or a war against, and maybe it's kind of tapering off. I don't know if it's officially ended. They're working out peace right now, pretty close to it. My opinion on this would even change sometimes day to day. You know, I'd see the terrible things that have happened. I'd be like, wipe those people out. But then on the other hand, I have a son who's a soldier, and I don't know that I'd necessarily want him going across the world and dying in a war. I mean, I definitely don't want him dying in a war. I don't know that I would send other people's sons to die in a war for a foreign country. So I got to take all these things in consideration. I don't say that just because we're quote unquote a Christian nation, or me as a Christian individual, that means I think America has to get involved in every war that Israel's involved in. Even if Israel has a righteous cause behind their military actions, doesn't mean that we necessarily have to go in and put boots on the ground to help them. So these are complicated issues. These are complex things. Just because you believe God has a plan for Israel, and just because you are a quote-unquote Zionist Christian, it does not obligate you to support all of this stuff, all right? So kind of put all this together. These are complicated issues, guys. And it's okay if you disagree. Here's what I would say. I think Israel still has a place in God's plan. But also, it doesn't really matter what I think, because God is going to do what God is going to do. But I do support Israel's existence. But I don't like all the gay pride parades that they have in Tel Aviv. But I do think it was wrong that the Gazan terrorists massacred them that day on October 7th. But that doesn't mean that I think that we should send our soldiers to die in their war. But I do hope Israel wins their war, okay? And maybe the war is kind of over now, but I hope you see my point. You can be a Christian and you can hold all these positions simultaneously. You can be a Christian and hold different positions on these things. And you can still be a faithful Bible follower. You're not obligated to take one of these stances. Again, beyond, I do think we should support their right to exist. All right? But you can still criticize them. So be aware of this as we wrap up today. Sometimes people criticize Israel because they have a legitimate grievance against something that the nation does. Sometimes people criticize Israel because they're anti-Semitic. And you do have to use some wisdom and discernment on who you listen to and where their motivations lie. All right? And you know what? There's some things I don't agree about Israel, but I'm not going to fixate on Tel Aviv, because guess what? America's got San Francisco. And I'm not going to sit over here and complain about, I'm not going to hold a grudge about their COVID response over in Israel. I wasn't too happy about America's COVID response either. So check your sources, judge fairly, judge with righteous judgment, And don't just know what you believe, but know why you believe it. This has been Luke Taylor, and I hope the Bible makes more sense to you after this episode. And until next time, keep seeking the truth that's revealed from God and his prophets.